You are the Canadian Donation and Transplantation Research Program. You are CDTRP.
The CDTRP is a network of more than 400 clinicians, senior, mid, and early career researchers, trainees, patient, family, and donor partners, and 100 partner organizations. Our network has supported 275 collaborative research projects and has mobilized research into policy change, legislation, commercial products, and improved knowledge for patients, families, and donors. Every year, CDTRP supports between $30 to $40 million in grant applications, something around 60 to 70 individual applications. You are CDTRP. These achievements wouldn't be possible without your hard work.
CDTRP Research Services is a platform that supports principal investigators to develop high-quality research in donation and transplantation. We work hand-in-hand with CDTRP investigators to maximize the effectiveness of research teams through support with funding development, project management, patient, family, and donor partnership, knowledge mobilization, events, and trainee support. Across the 5 research themes, we help teams mobilize new knowledge to ensure patient, family, donors, healthcare systems, partners, and stakeholders equitably benefit from research results.
If you are a basic scientist and would like support with your knowledge mobilization plan, if you are a busy clinician scientist with limited time for research but would like to run a multi-site study, if you are an early career researcher and looking for collaborators to help with your grant applications, if you value patient, family, and donor engagement but are not sure how to find the right patient partners or what role they will have in your project, if you don't have full-time research staff but need support,
we are here to help. Our experienced management team can support you at every stage of your research in donation and transplantation.
Now you are probably thinking, how can I request CDTRP Research Services support? The answer is simple. Go to the CDTRP Research Services Platform website, fill out the form to request support, and we will get in touch with you to discuss your needs. That's it.
We.
Nous.
Noi.
Nos.
Emis.
Nosotros.
Menk.
Kiano. We. Kiano.
Our CDTRP, and we will drive research advances so that every wish to donate is fulfilled and transplantation becomes a lasting and sustainable cure.
You are CDTRP.
Email us today.
Now I will go on to introduce our next 2 speakers for the next presentation, which is Advancing Donation Research in Clinical Trials, the Current Landscape and the Role of PFD Partners. So Charles Weyer is a professor of medicine, epidemiology, and biostatistics and philosophy at Western University in London, Canada. Charles is an internationally recognized expert in research ethics. His publications on the duty of care in clinical research, the ethical analysis of study benefits and harms, and empowering communities in research have been broadly influential. Charles has co-led a collaboration that produced the first international ethics guidelines for cluster randomized trials. He's also collaborated with Dr. Adrian M. Owen on a project exploring the ethics of functional neuroimaging after severe brain injury. Charles's current work explores the ethics of research involving imminently dying patients and ethical issues in organ donation, including the use of normothermic regional perfusion. We are also joined today by Lori Blackstock, who is an intercultural facilitator and learning designer in the Ottawa area. She has gained firsthand knowledge of the deceased organ and tissue donor process when her husband, Stephen Beliveau, experienced neurological death in January of 2017. In 2018, Lori told her husband's story as a witness on behalf of the Kidney Foundation of Canada to the House of Commons Standing Committee on Health. She then became the PFD co-lead for CDTRP's Theme 1, Improving the Culture of Donation, for 3 years. She also then contributed to several research projects. Lori joins us today as a PFD partner with the Normothermic Regional Perfusion Ethics Pilot Study led by the CDTRP Research Innovation Grant awardee, Charles Vire. She is also currently a member of the PFD team led by Charles on improving donor family experiences with organ and tissue donation. So Charles and Lori, I'm going to pass it off to you now.
Great, thank you very much, Amy. And let me just share my slides here, share our slides. All right, can you see those slides?
Yes, we can.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be with you today, to be among friends with CDTRP, and to be co-presenting with Lori Blackstock. So our objectives today are several. We're going to share some of our experiences working together in donation research, and I'm going to say something about the roles of donor family partners in a couple of our studies. And then Lori's going to talk about what worked and what would we do differently. So the first project is a project on the ethics of a new perfusion technology that there's great interest in, called normothermic regional perfusion, and we were funded in 2021 by CDTRP as well as the Trillium Gift of Life Network to do a pilot study on the ethics of this new perfusion technology. So normothermic regional perfusion is widely used in Europe, and it's used in a growing number of centers in the United States. It enhances organ viability, and there's some observational data suggesting improved recipient outcomes, but no high quality RCTs yet. One of I think the major obstacles to this, to the adoption of this technology, are the difficult ethical issues that it raises. Does restarting circulation threaten the dead donor rule? What about issues of donor safety? Do we need a special informed consent process when we use NRP in organ donation? And perhaps the biggest question is, what will the impact be on stakeholder trust in the donation system? So our study is looking at the ethics of NRP, and it's a pilot study. Our objectives were two: to identify ethical issues in NRP and develop an explanatory model of potential impacts on stakeholder trust. So our methods included a scoping review and interviews with 29 stakeholders, including donor family, organ recipients, health providers and people affiliated with organ donation organizations. So we're so pleased to work with Lori throughout the life of this project. Lori is a member of the research team, and she was from day one. She brings her experience as donor family, and she also brings professional expertise as an educator and facilitator. And both of these things have been absolutely central importance to us. Lori worked with us to plan the pilot study and to actually write the co-author with us the funding application to CDTRP. She then worked with us to co-write the interview guide and participated in some of the interviews as we were doing them. One of the key challenges is that, you know, at the time we were interviewing people, there had not been any cases of NRP in Canada. So no one involved in the interviews had actual sort of lived experience with NRP. So we needed to develop an educational video to bring people up to speed on the different pathways to organ donation and where NRP fits into this. And Lori's role or expertise as an educator was absolutely central here. She worked together with our postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Nick Murphy, to write the script for an 11-minute video that we produced, and we ran this before each of our interviews to make sure people were up to speed on NRP. So that was really a key contribution that Lori made to our project. She was also involved in the analysis and writing the paper. The paper actually just came out last Monday. So this is pretty hot off the presses. It's called Sowing the Seeds of Trust: How Trust in NRP is Built in a Continuum of Care, and it was published in the American Journal of Transplantation, and Lori, of course, is a co-author on that paper. So where's that work going now? Well, we have our pilot study. We have sort of what we've done here in Ontario, and based on our success so far, we thought, you know, now's the time to take this national. So Lori worked with a team of us to develop a CIHR project grant that we submitted in March with 35 researchers, donor family partners, ethicists, lawyers from across the country, and it includes 5 provincial organ donation organizations. So we're hopeful we'll hear later this month or early next month how we did with CIHR. The second project is actually looking more broadly at donor interventions. NRP is one kind of donor intervention, but there are other donor interventions like heparin that are given to donors while they're still alive. And we needed to look at our ability to do donor intervention randomized controlled trials. So this project aims to sort of set the groundwork for that. Donor interventions, again funded by CDTRP. Thank you very much, and thanks to London Health Sciences Centre. Donor interventions involve the use of medications, management protocols, medical devices, a whole range of things potentially to improve organ viability and recipient outcomes. But a real challenge in this space is the fact that, you know, while we think these things probably work, we don't have high quality evidence that they are in fact safe and effective. And so we need to do randomized controlled trials to make sure that our practice is evidence-based. So our study aims to set some of the groundwork to allow future donor intervention RCTs. We're mapping relevant laws and regulations that impact donor interventions. We're reviewing existing research ethics guidelines to see if there's any guidance out there to sort of help us out. And importantly, we're identifying trial outcomes responsive to the priorities of donor families. Our methods here include a legal mapping review, a scoping review, and what I'll say a little bit more about is we've created a donor family expert panel. So that part of the project seeks to create a core outcome data set. Trials, of course, can measure many, many things, but a core outcome set is a list of outcomes which experts have recommended that all researchers should measure in every randomized controlled trial in a particular space. You can measure other things, but first and foremost, you should measure these things in the core outcome data set. These are a really good idea. They allow for knowledge synthesis. They allow for the creation of better knowledge and a more efficient translation of that knowledge into practice. There are proposed core outcomes for organ donors and recipient variables, but there's a need for core outcomes that are relevant specifically to donor families. So we put together with Lori a donor family expert panel. Lori is chairing it, and we have on that panel Diana Brodrecht, Mary Donaghy, Christine Godard, Heather Talbot, and Jennifer Wolf-Smith. And it's such a pleasure working with each of them. We've had a number of meetings beginning at the annual scientific meeting in person in December 2023. We had another virtual meeting in April 2024. We're having a third meeting next week, and I think probably a final meeting in September or so. And basically the steps that we're following here start with a discussion of positive and negative experiences in the donation process from a donor family perspective, distilling some common and important themes. And then the ultimate challenge for our expert panel will be to begin the process of translating those into donor family relevant outcomes. And to be just completely explicit about this, donor family are driving this process completely. These are their meetings, and they will write a report to inform us of the outcomes of interest. So it's the process is off to a great start, and then it will fit into the larger picture by being integrated into a larger core outcome data set. And ultimately, our job together will be to promote core outcomes for use in future donor intervention RCTs. So what is the role of patient, family, and donor partners? Well, many. They help us ask the right questions, design studies that are relevant, choose outcome measures, plan for effective recruitment, create educational and consent materials, and promote the uptake of study results. Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to Lori here. Maybe I'm just gonna stop the share, Lori, and I can start the share when you tell me.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name's Lori Blackstock, and Charles mentioned that I'm involved in organ and tissue donation really as a result of my husband, Stephen Beliveau's deceased organ donation in January 2017. And so I have a picture of him here beside a train track because of his love of trains. And partly because his birthday would be this Sunday, he would have turned 65 years old. So the timing of this presentation is really coincides with him being very much on my mind. And so I'm really happy to be able to speak to you today and also to share in a little more detail what exactly we did to engage the other PFDs that Charles has mentioned, as well as my involvement in the NRP project. And I use the term PFD, the CDTRP term PFD, patients, families, donors, to include family and friends of deceased donors, and it includes living donors. So in lieu of the word patients, you'll hear me say PFDs. Charles, can you bring up the first slide? So I'll talk about what worked and what we might do differently. I'd like to acknowledge Linda Butler's presentation this morning, where she gave really practical recommendations on making research pertinent to PFDs. I found that really useful, and I would say that this presentation goes a little bit more into how did we apply those kinds of principles. And also I appreciated Maureen Smith's chart on the levels of PFD engagement. As you know, that is one example of a very participatory approach to research. This was significant to me way back when I got involved in the NRP project in the fall of 2021. First, Dr. Murat Slesarov contacted me one-on-one to explain the project. And, you know, what is this NRP? It took me time to learn normothermic regional perfusion and for those words to roll off my tongue. But it really helped that here this doctor took the time to at least half an hour to just get to know me and say, this is what we're thinking of doing. We haven't started yet. Would you be interested? Then I heard from the postdoctoral candidate, Nick Murphy, more about logistics and could he set up a meeting with Dr. Charles Vayer. And so I had one-on-one meetings with Murat, Nick, and Charles, the core team. This had never happened before. And I found it useful in building my sense of how would I work with these three experts, men, experts in their field. Was I going to enjoy it and get something out of it myself? And I say that really bluntly because, as I've said to Manuel Escada a few times at CDTRP, I feel like I have a shelf life as the wife of a deceased donor. There's a certain amount of time that I think my experience is useful, and it's now, you know, I'm in the 7th year since he died. And also, as you know, trauma-informed approaches have been mentioned this morning, it does take a toll. Like each time I'm reliving that ICU experience and to some extent the grief that followed. And each time, you know, even if I'm not telling his story, I'm sure that transplant recipients and donors in the group today will relate to this. Something often comes to mind that may or may not be triggering. It's just a memory that perhaps was much deeper in the back of my mind, could be useful, in fact, in the project, but it's also something I then need to manage. You know, maybe it goes on a shelf, maybe maybe it's not significant, and maybe it's something that after the meeting or even during the meeting, I go off camera for a few minutes just to mull that over. So this was meaningful that they asked. It's really clear to me how Murat asked, could you tell me about Stephen? And that surprised me too. Like here we were, you know, we were working a research project, but who is it? You know, why are you involved? What was Stephen like? Next slide, Charles. So Charles and Murat and Nick have always treated me as an expert and recognize both the professional experience and lived experience as a donor family member. And with the NRP project, Charles hadn't written a word. No one had written a word except to say, here's what we're thinking. And same with the latest project. So they truly applied a participatory approach, or which sometimes called participatory action research. The principles of participatory approaches, I've heard over and over again in the 3 presentations this morning, really giving that sense of ownership, not just as a token, but, you know, I'll say a bit more about this later, but genuinely caring about the thoughts and feelings of everyone on the team as equals. And there is a power difference, as Maureen Smith mentioned, but that I always felt like not only could I speak up, but I could mention how I was feeling about something. I feel valued. For the second, we didn't create group guidelines and discuss how we would work together, maybe explicitly for the NRP project. But for this latest project on improving the donor family experience, I'm a facilitator myself, and so Charles asked, would I like to facilitate at least the first meeting where we met in person? And I thought, yeah, you know, when I facilitate workshops, we always go over group guidelines or group norms and ask the question, how do we want to work together, not only for this meeting, but for this project. So in a moment, I'll show you a sample of the beginning, let's say, of a team charter that came from the other PFDs. Again, for that project, it was really important to have a flexible meeting agenda and lots of time allocated to getting to know each other. So with the 5 PFDs and Murat and Charles and Nick, it's actually Charles, and I give you so much credit for this, Charles, who said, I think we need to give this more time. Because I'm a little more time focused, and I thought, oh, an hour and a half's enough. And it was Charles that said, are you sure? You know, maybe 2 hours, just in case, you know, the storytelling of that ICU experience, you know, requires some support. And, you know, of course, I thought about it. Of course, yeah. Do we need to ask people in advance if they'd like a counselor present, or what would they want to be in place in order to feel comfortable sharing their ICU experience and what followed, that really was just a loose, let's get to know each other. Can you tell us about your experience to the extent you're comfortable? And we may get to sort of narrowing down some of the things that came out of this story, these stories that could be useful towards, you know, coming up with recommendations for the core outcome data set. But it doesn't matter if it doesn't. Let's just see what happens in sharing these ICU experiences. So then my facilitator hat came back on, saying, well, let's have some sort of structure. So we created a timeline on the wall in this in-person meeting. And as each PFD was telling about their experience, then Nick wrote down keywords on large Post-it notes. And at the end, we didn't know if we'd have time to do this or not. So again, it was important to have that flexible agenda. Each person looked through the set of Post-it notes from their story of the ICU experience and the months that followed. And then they themselves put those up on the timeline where they felt they belonged. And we, the PFDs, began to group them a little bit into themes that were coming out of that did relate to the research. You know, if they hadn't, it wouldn't have mattered. We were getting to know each other, but we could see themes arising of what really helped in that ICU experience that could be included in the eventual research. So we're not doing research. We'll end up writing a paper ourselves among the PFDs that list recommendations for improving donor family experiences. So here's an example of, I guess we'll call it the beginnings of a team charter on how we wanted to work together. So valuing donor family members, both personal and professional experience, recognizing the emotional impact of the work, demonstrating genuine interest in each other's stories and contributions, interacting in such a way as each person feels safe and feels heard, and having some fun. And yeah, the genuine humility, genuine interest that I feel from Charles Murat and Nick go a long way to supporting what in my workshops I call the 3 pillars of participation. So if you imagine a structure with 3 pillars, on one end is that sharing and partnership. On the other end is the behaviors and attitudes expressed by the members of the group. And in the middle are the tools and methods used to work together. If that middle pillar cracks a bit or even crumbles, the tools and methods, the overall structure with 2 pillars at the end and an arch across, it can remain standing. It's weaker, but it'll remain standing. But if you lose one of those pillars at either end, the sharing and partnership, the behaviors and attitudes, that whole structure collapses. So the team charter begins to outline to us, a common way to collaborate. But I thought it was interesting that what the other PFDs offered as ways they want to work together were behaviors and attitudes. It was those end structural pillars. And that really reinforces what we heard, I think, from Maureen Smith and from Linda Butler in their presentations on patient engagement that's really pertinent to the needs of the patients or the PFDs themselves. There was an attention to logistics that I appreciated too. So my time is valued, and I saw that in one of the earlier presentations. Meetings are structured so that everyone can attend, and that's not easy when you have 5 or 6 PFDs and a core team of 4 and potentially others that will be involved as we go along. So we plan meetings well in advance. That first meeting I mentioned was held in person, and unfortunately only 2 other PFDs were able to attend in December at the CDTRP scientific meeting. So the next meeting included 3 more PFDs, plus Heather and Christine and I, so a total of 6. Yeah, and I thought it was worthwhile mentioning that Charles, at the very beginning of the NRP project, asked me to track my time and suggested a timesheet. I said, oh yes, I use those all the time for my projects. So it did, just in a practical sense, it made it easier that after every meeting or any official request, like to review a paper or to write a section of a grant, for example, particularly on my role, that I would immediately jot down on my timesheet how much time I'd spent. And at the end of the project, a check arrived in the mail from Western University, and I would do it anyway, but it feels good to have my time not, I don't know, to have it honored and not just assumed that, oh yeah, she's a volunteer, she cares, you know, her husband died, she's going to do it anyway. Um, but yeah, that you know, significant check, that really did feel good, I have to say, at the end of the project. And I think that's everything. I thought about saying more about every aspect of the project that I was involved in, but feel free to ask questions. It really was every stage, and in a meaningful way. So what will we do differently in the future? Charles and I could not think of anything because it was an iterative process. We had discussions throughout. Nick, Murat, and Charles are very friendly, approachable people, and yeah, it just worked. I will mention, because someone was talking about Indigenous involvement, involvement of Indigenous peoples, that my work is in intercultural effectiveness. And so DEI, like diversity, equity, inclusion, and recognition of intersectionality too, within individuals, is really important to me. And we did have the discussion that the 6 of us PFDs involved in writing this paper are all white women and over, you know, a certain age. And did that matter? And of course it matters. It matters. But we felt you know, we've heard the difficulty of the challenges, let's say, of even finding deceased donor families willing to do this is a challenge. And then, you know, we tried various recruitment methods for both projects, for interviewees and for PFDs as actual members of the project, not just interviewees. And again, it has been a challenge to even find men willing, who are deceased donor family members or friends, willing to spend a fairly significant amount of time contributing to a project. So we needed to move forward, and I agreed it's important to our thoughts and feelings of the ICU experience, of course, are valuable as is. Let's get them down. It's the beginning, and it's not the research project. It's us contributing to laying the foundation of those core outcome data sets. And Charles, is there anything you would want to add to that before we open it up to questions?
No, that's fantastic, Lori. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you so much, Lori and Charles. We have time for one quick question. So again, you can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand. And I'm just going to pause quickly to see if there are any questions already in the chat, or if anyone has their hand raised.
And while you think, I'm going to show you a few silly photos of my husband, who's on my mind. He was quite a goof, loved camping. And here he was goofing off as a Sears catalog model.
Sandra, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, hi, Laurie and Charles. Great presentation. I was just wondering, I love the work that you have on the patient family. Well, it's mostly donor families on your advisory board. Now, there are other projects that are going on with donor interventions. I've been working on one with Maureen Mead, Synergy, which we've seen presentations about. I think it would be good maybe for CDTRP as one of the things that we do by connecting people. Maybe when there's certain groups that are involved like this, where there are donor interventions, that we can sort of somehow work together. Heather was on ours and myself as a patient, but it would be good to have that advisory committee, especially if you're willing to do it. Because, you know, as I said, there's not a lot of people. So I just think it's good, that maybe that would be a suggestion. So, and I also want to thank all the donor families that are willing to be vulnerable and relive their experiences. And that the fact that not only you acknowledge that, but Linda Hunter in the beginning, how important that is. And I know Sherry talked about it and Patricia talked about it, the trauma that happens. And for donor families, I can just imagine, the reliving of the trauma and experience is very difficult. So, and allowing space for that. So whoever was that, I think you said it was Charles. That's what I put in my earlier comments. I've been on agendas where they have patient story, and I've been vulnerable and shared my story, and then it's like next, and it's like, how are you going to get patients to tell their story when it's like a 5-minute thing on an agenda? So thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and Sandra, some of the ICU experiences were, and what led up to even arriving in ICU were, well, we were just speechless and really just trying to have a bit of silence and just honor what that person was sharing. And I have to admit, we were, I think all of us were in tears. Yeah, it was Charles who made sure we had like at least an extra half hour to, in case the buffer room to not have to push forward and go next.
Thank you, everyone. If there are any more questions for Lori and Charles, you can feel free to continue to add those questions to the chat, and we will reach out to help facilitate responses via email.